Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled They Arrived in November. A short sci-fi movie. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They arrived in November when the air was thin and the trees already skeletons. The mountains had gone quiet early that year, as if the world had chosen to hold its breath before the first snow. In the small town of Heartline, Colorado, a place with more sky than people, the first sign was not a flare in the heavens or a thunder of engines. It was an absence. The power died with a sigh, the radio fell to whispers, and the last song on the diner jukebox stretched like taffy and snapped into silence. Lee Morrow stood behind the fogged window of the diner and wiped a circle clear with her sleeve. Across Route 40, the empty gas station sign flickered once and gave up. A stray dog pricked its ears and stared into the sky as if scolded by a god no one had seen. The clouds, heavy and low, leaned toward the spine of the Rockies, and from that direction a green sheen bled into the gray like watercolor. "Storm?" asked old Greg from his corner stool, because men like old Greg arranged the world into storms and not storms, fixable things and the other kind. Lee listened. The silence had weight. "Not weather," she said. "Listen." It was a hum below hearing, a pressure on the chest like the air before lightning strikes. In the road the dog howled. They came as needles of light, hundreds of them sewing bright lines through the clouds. Not meteors, they moved with purpose, slowed, hovered, then bled into shapes. Towers unfolded from the sky and plunged into the earth without a sound, like spears set gently into loam. One of them, the tallest, struck the high range north of town on a ridge locals called Dead Hand. It pierced the rock, paused, and began to grow. By dusk, the tower was a glass-black thorn 10 times taller than any radio mast, latticed with veins of violet and cyan that pulsed like breathing. People watched from porches. Priests made calls no one answered. A few drove toward the glow and didn't come back. Somewhere far away, a city, Lee could not tell which, stained the clouds orange and then went dark as though a candle pinched between 2 fingers. When the first message arrived, it arrived without words. It slid into the mind, pressed against the thought like a hand on the back of the neck. Every living person understood it differently and the same. Balance, correction, ode. The panic that followed felt pre-written. Sirens in cities that no longer had power, soldiers mustered and sent, preachers who had never asked for an audience suddenly drowning in it. The president spoke from a bunker, froze mid-sentence, and the feed died. In the absence of instruction, people found each other. In Heartline, Lee turned the diner into a shelter, built a fire in the kitchen's wood stove, and boiled water in dented pots with no handles. She was nobody special, which is the kind of person the end of the world belongs to. By the 3rd day, the sky above Dead Hand Tower was permanently wrong. It rippled with a cold aurora that made shadows move the opposite way. Birds abandoned the town. The deer that wandered down from the timberline stared at the tower and forgot to eat. The river shrank as if the current had changed its mind and was running its own direction beneath the dirt. A convoy arrived, 5 worn-out Humvees and a truck with mismatched tires. Soldiers got out, faces set in stone. Lee recognized one man instantly despite the beard and the months carved into his eyes. Elias Rourke, a boy who'd once kissed her on a football field and then left town to find bigger wars. He was a captain now. It looked like the rank had been stapled to him by a tired universe. He didn't recognize her at first, not in the half-light and the fear. When he did, his shoulders loosened by a degree. "Lee," he said, almost smiling. "You stayed. Someone had to keep the coffee hot," she replied, and the words were almost a miracle. They set their crude command post in the school gym. The banners still hung, T-Bird State 3A runners-up. Children's handprints on paper turkeys lined the wall in delirious reds and yellows. Some soldier had draped a flag over the scoreboard, and it looked sad and stubborn and correct. They had a radio that sometimes kissed a frequency shyly and then ran away, a generator that ate gasoline like sugar, a map of the county with Sharpie circles around the tower and the shattered mountain roads. A scientist arrived 2 days later, Dr. Yara Mendel, hair a black comet tail, eyes ringed with exhaustion. She spoke as if words were bricks and she'd grown used to carrying masonry. Elias introduced her to Lee the way people introduce hope. "Yara knows what it is," he said. "I know enough to be frightened," Yara answered. "The tower isn't a ship, it's a body, or at least a suit. The life inside it is broadcast down like lightning. The shell, what we see, it resonates with the planet's magnetic field." "Why here?" Lee asked. "Why blood goes to a wound," Yara said. "Because the field is strong in the mountains, because the crust is thin here, because the plates argue like old lovers and anything with ears can hear it. They came to correct an equation they believe we violate. Their math says we take more than we return, so they'll balance the sum." "How?" Elias asked. "By simplifying it," Yara said, "by removing a variable." Outside, the sky flashed like a silent camera. The ground shuddered in a way that didn't disturb the bowls stacked in the cafeteria but made the bones of everyone in the gym ache. The tower pulsed. Lee thought of a heartbeat the size of a continent. The first counterattack went like a dream remembered wrong. There were still jets. 2 of them scavenged and coaxed alive. They dove at dead hand with bright contrails like swords. The tower flexed. The jets melted midair, dropped in pieces the size of songs. No sound arrived, not even the honest boom of falling metal. The tower didn't punish. It corrected. People left Heartline in little caravans, rabbiting toward cities that had ceased to be cities when the data died. Others arrived from the hills with packs and rifles, because some humans run toward the worst thing and call it duty. Lee stayed. There was no doctrine behind it. The diner stove could still boil water. The gym could still hold bodies. The town had a name, and that meant it mattered. Elias asked her to come up to the ridge with the observation team. She said yes because his voice had lost the distance she remembered from their last talk long ago under unfamiliar stars. The hike up Dead Hand cut her lungs like glass. Halfway there, they passed a pasture where horses stood facing the ribbon of the highway, all in a row, as if awaiting orders. At the overlook, the tower blocked the sky. Its surface looked like obsidian until you looked closer and saw the skin of it move, plates sliding on plates, light filling the seams. When it breathed, the snow at their feet ticked with tiny motions, the crystals rounding their sharpness as if worn by an invisible tide. Dr. Mendel knelt by a rock and touched it. For a second, Lee saw the stone sink like bread dough under the weight of a gentle thumb. "They're re-indexing reality to their preferred table," Yara murmured. "Tuning the constant. Think of the world as a violin and them as fingers on the strings." "And we're the song they don't like," Elias said. "Or the noise between notes," Yara replied. That night in the gym, Lee lay awake on a wrestling mat and listened to the sleeping. It was intimate, the chorus of human breath, like being inside a living engine whose fuel was hope and stubbornness and the need to see another dawn. She thought of the diner, the cheap coffee spoons, old Greg squinting at the window. She thought of the child she had not had and the house she had not bought and the trip to the ocean she had never made. November had always tasted like endings. She decided to pretend it was a beginning. The voice came on the 5th day. It wasn't a sound but a pressure, a gentle hand cupping the skull. It said, "We have come to equalize. Entropy accrues a debt. Life spends it thoughtlessly. This place is overdrawn," it said. "Exchange is not cruelty. It is law," it said. "You are capable of understanding. Please understand." Someone screamed. Others fell to their knees. Elias stood stiff as a flagpole. Lee clenched her teeth until she had a headache. Yara whispered, "If law speaks, it can be argued with." "How?" Lee asked. "By existence," Yara said. "By refusing to be a term they can cross out." Elias formed the strike teams. No jets left. No drones either. The tower sang electronics to sleep. They loaded old trucks with coil guns and chemical rockets, unromantic things that obeyed gravity and nerves. The plan was not to topple the tower, but to talk to it loudly enough that whatever lived inside would have to notice. The din of human effort is sometimes a plea. The climb to the base felt longer this time. Elias carried a rocket tube on his shoulder like a log he intended to burn. Lee had a medpack in a backpack stained brown with a stranger's history. Yara wore a harness strung with devices that looked like instruments and traps. They reached a ledge that hung over a bowl of black glass. The tower rose from the center of that bowl like a tooth growing from polished jawbone. Up close, its skin smelled like cold and lightning. "Here," Yara said, and snapped a tripod open. "We'll try to ping its core. If it's piloted, we'll give the pilot a reason to answer. If it's not, we'll make the operators somewhere else perk up." The device hummed. A dark wave rippled through the tower. Lee's fillings ached. A web of violet flared across the structure's surface like veins seen through the skin of a hand. Elias fired a rocket. The tower didn't retaliate. It listened. Lee felt the idea as much as she felt gravity. The viola strings of the earth paused under a foreign hand. Then the hand pushed. The ledge bucked. The bowl flexed like water in slow motion. Lee fell to one knee and watched a stone next to her sink an inch and rise, visited by a pressure that had no direction and contained all directions at once. Elias grabbed her arm and hauled her up. "Back," he said, and his voice was very quiet. "We've made our point." They scrambled out as the bowl malformed under invisible stress, smoothing, hardening, the tower sinking another foot as if the mountain had found a more comfortable chair. Behind them, Yara cursed softly. "It hurt us, it just doesn't care." Care arrived that night. The voice spoke not like law now, but like a person. It had edges and uncertainty. "We were flesh once," it said. "We endured winters and breath and blood. We chose this to survive the subtraction of stars. We became principle so we could not be removed with a bullet. We regret the necessities we carry like knives." It paused. "We see you." Lee sat up in the gym, heart climbing her ribs. "Then look," she said into the air, "look well." No one else spoke aloud, but she felt them thinking hard, a chorus of human refusal. The voice withdrew as if stung. In the morning, a snow so fine it felt like a memory fell and vanished on the skin. The cold was wrong. It had the texture of something that had been calculated. People coughed and could not stop. Bottled water tasted of tin and winter. Lee brewed tea and held a paper cup to old Greg's trembling hands. "Sip," she said, the way she had once said it to her mother in a hospital at the edge of town. Another November, another tower of white machines. He obeyed and steadied and lived to see noon. Elias walked in, boots leaving little craters of melted snow. "Word from the west," he said. "The towers in the desert are knitting. They're making a ring. Yara says when it closes the field goes with it. The sun will peel us like fruit." "How long?" Lee asked. "Days," he said. Yara unfolded a hand-drawn map on the cafeteria table. Circles and lines like a spider too clever to be killed. "We can't hit them all," she said. "Not with what we have left. But physics is a bully that believes in leverage. If we pull one right thread at the right time." She tapped a junction point where three towers' influence overlapped the crust's weak bones. "Here. Dead hand is one of the anchors. If we break it at the moment the ring draws tight, the tension might snap it." "Might?" Elias asked. "Might is a generous word," Yara said. "We're beyond certainty." Lee looked up at the ceiling stains. They had always looked like continents. She imagined a world shaped like a water stain, edges fuzzy, heart pale. Some people are built for certainties. She had never met many of them and didn't like the ones she had. They prepared as if for a mountain wedding. Everyone had a job, everyone wore their best. The best was threadbare, but it held. At dusk, the entire town climbed. Those who could not fight carried blankets, food, bandages. Those who could carried weapons that looked too small. The sound of boots on snow was a river. Elias walked at the front and Lee at his side, and Yara behind them with her calculators and her stubbornness. The horses in the pasture watched them go and stamped, steam off their backs like prayers. Halfway up the voice returned, closer than breath. "Do not. You will rupture what you cannot mend." "Mend this," Lee said, and thought at the tower of her mother and the paper cup and old Greg's hands and the jukebox trying hard. "Mend November." The ridge broadened to a black balcony. The tower loomed. The sky above it glowed the dead blue of television static. Beyond, the western horizon flashed like a heartbeat in a bruise, the other towers pulling their ring taut. The night air felt like the inside of a battery. Yara knelt and stabbed metal rods into the rock. Wires ran to a fat case shaped like a suitcase that had swallowed a small bomb. "When the ring tries to close, this thing will lie to it," she said. "Tell it the note it needs is here, not there. It will overcorrect, like a drunk on a narrow road. If we're lucky, it falls into a ditch and only breaks a leg. If we aren't, it takes the car and the driver and the county with it." "Poetry," Elias said, almost smiling. "Disaster is just poetry with a low opinion of meter," Yara replied. The pull on Lee's teeth increased. She tasted pennies. The tower inhaled. The aurora overhead sharpened until individual threads of light could be seen twisting inside it, braiding into a rope being thrown. Far to the west, a flare went up, a tower in the salt flats firing a lance of violet into the sky. Another from the desert beyond it, another from the sea. The ring began to close, a crown made by indifferent gods. Now, Yara whispered and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world skipped like a scratched record. The tower shuddered and bent a fraction toward them as if noticing a mosquito on its cheek. The ring's light wobbled. Mist sought. The tower's skin crawled toward the rods Yara had planted, chasing a lie through the math. It leaned back. Elias yelled and everyone stumbled away as the tower fell. It didn't fall like a tree. It fell like a glacier deciding it preferred to be a river. It flowed, it screamed without sound. It came apart into plates and knitted again, and all the while it swung toward the rods. The mountain groaned. Lee felt the note in her bones, a deep D that belonged to old Earth. She covered her ears to stop nothing and kept moving, dragging a boy by the elbow who'd frozen in awe. The tip of the tower kissed the rods and swallowed them like sweets. The ring in the sky snapped. The sound that followed should not have carried so far, but it did. It was the sound of steel wire breaking on a winch, the whip through air, the smack into flesh. The horizon strobed. Towers flared and guttered. The aurora inverted, the blue turned to gold, the violet to a warm green that seemed to remember trees. Down. Elias threw Lee into the snow as a sheet of light rolled over the ridge like surf. It smelled of mint and burning, the memory of a hospital and a pine forest braided into a new and terrible thing. The sheet passed. Lee looked up. The tower lay in a backwards arch like a broken knuckle. It twitched, as if realizing an error it could not fix. The voice returned, breathless, angered not from offense but from surprise. "You are not a variable. You are noise given insistence." It paused, and in the pause Lee felt sorrow like a cold hand. "We were taught to remove noise, but your noise composes a song." "Then listen," Lee said. For a heartbeat, all the lights across the west went out. The night was as truly black as any eye has ever known, the kind of dark that pre-existed stars. In it she heard humanity, the whisper of 1,000 camps, the crack of ice on an old river, the paper hush of a priest turning a thin page, the click of a lighter in a room where compassion chose to stay late. It was not a sound the invaders had planned to hear, but it was what they heard. The sky rewrote itself in a new geometry. Instead of a ring there was a net, and in the weave of that net were gaps left intentionally empty, the way a weaver leaves pockets for the way fingers must find the mug's handle in the morning. The towers, still standing, shifted. Some retracted their roots an inch as if a dancer had realized the stage's limit. The crackle in Lee's teeth lessened. She spat blood and laughed. "Not done," Yara murmured. "They're not gone, they're negotiating with themselves now." The broken tower began to heal, but not into its old posture. It reformed into a lower spire, its tip capped by a shimmering crown the shape of a cupped hand. Yara frowned. "Receiving mode," she said. "They want to talk." They descended to the gym like pilgrims. The soldiers set their guns down. The lights, battery lamps and candles and wishful thinking, through shadows that looked like maps of places with unpronounceable names. The tower spoke again without words, and this time without pressure. It offered a picture. A star dying with dignity, planets' peels of fruit already eaten. Creatures like fog pouring into machines to survive a winter measured not in seasons but in eras. Those creatures, the architects, had learned that to endure they had to write their laws into reality's rewritable margins. In time, they mistook what was flexible for what was good. They apologized, not with a word any human would use, but with a posture the mind recognizes, head lowered, hand empty, weapon away. Elias stood at the front of the room the way a pastor does when he has to tell mourners they can go home now and find their new lives there. "We can't survive your corrections," he said plainly to the empty air. "Balance us by joining us or leave." "Join," the voice repeated, tasting the word. Yara stepped forward. "We can help you balance without erasing us. You can lend us the math, we can lend you the story." She touched her chest as if pointing to a credential pin there. "We are good at stories, we remember debts, we pay them with songs and with graves and with planting trees we will never sit under." Silence. Outside, the snow started again, thin as breath. "We do not understand," the voice admitted after a time, "but we can learn, teach, and we will feed the field you need to live while we listen." The towers dimmed to a glow like embers. The aurora softened to a curtain of pale silk. The air relaxed its grip on teeth and bones. The river's sound returned, shy but true. People wept as if grief had just been invented. Learning began at once because humans do not let a miracle cool. In the school library, Yara sat with a tower fragment in a case of glass and asked it questions by humming notes through a tuning fork. The fragment answered by altering the temperature of the room by 1 degree in this direction and then that, by making the dust settle more quickly on the cover of an atlas, by letting the second hand of the big clock pause. Language developed like it always does. Necessity shaped into pattern, shaped into meaning held together by humor. Lee told stories to it. Not myths and epics at first, but small things. The night she'd stolen a pie from the diner fridge when she was 17 and her mother had pretended not to notice. The way a car still smells like the person you love 3 days after they've left town. The particular cruelty of a November wind. The fragment listened. It warmed at the mention of heat and dimmed at the mention of death, and these were not metaphors. Elias took crews up the ridge to harvest what the tower now offered. A slow, deliberate stream of power rendered as simple as melted snow. They used it to run the generator, and for the first time in a week the scoreboard lights flickered and steadied. T-Birds 00 home 00 guest. Somebody laughed and couldn't stop, not because it was funny, but because the sound of working bulbs is a hymn. Other towns reported similar shifts. Not all towers had leaned toward conversation. Some had stood rigid and gone dark after the ring snapped, their operators retreating into whatever place entities like that go to think. But enough responded to change the arc of November. Across the world, small grids lit, clinics hummed, water plants breathed. In the city that had burned on the first night, a tower bowed and released a cloud of ash that fell as clean snow that wasn't cold and melted into clean water. A priest blessed it because that was his name for gratitude. Of course, not everything was saved. In the northern plains, a tower misread a story told by a desperate farmer about a drought and turned his fields to a mirror that reflected the stars even at noon. He lay down on it and watched the sky below him, and then got up, and told his wife it was beautiful and he'd plant something new. Beauty did not forgive the loss, but it made the mourning less spiteful. At the edge of Heartline, Lee reopened the diner. She wrote today's special, light on the chalkboard, and the joke made customers grin like children who had learned a new word. The jukebox didn't work. The tower could only feed analog machines very slowly, but old Greg brought a harmonica and found a note that made the windows hum in sympathy. The dog from the road lay under table 3 and did not bark at the sky anymore. In the second week, the architects sent a shape down the tower like a careful hand. It resolved into a figure as tall as a doorway, ripples of gray like water around a person-shaped emptiness. It didn't pretend to be human, but it wore intention like clothing, palms open, head inclined in a greeting. When it tried to walk, its feet slid a fraction through the floor, not because it meant harm, but because the border between ideas had not been perfectly negotiated. It stood in the gym. The children stared without fear because they had the least to unlearn. The adults stood with that loaded stillness that means every muscle has a job. Lee approached it with a cup of tea and set it on the ground. The figure mirrored her motion, then made a sound like breath, and the tea spun gently as a spoon moved itself. Steam rose. The figure shivered, and Lee recognized delight. Yara said, "We call you architects. What do you call yourselves?" The figure made a chord in the air that no human larynx could reproduce, a harmony of electricity and moving water and patience. Yara tried, failed, laughed, and waved her hand. "Architects will do," she said. The figure made a smaller chord that sounded like agreement. Elias lingered at the back, an ache in his shoulder that ached when weather changed, a habit of watching exits he thought he'd abandoned. The work had given him purpose again, but purpose grows like a vine. Left untended, it can choke the tree. He needed to move. He needed to help where danger still had an edge. He found it a week later when radios in the basin reported a tower refusing to dim, drawing energy from a fault line and sending it into the atmosphere like a thief making a run for the border. No voices answered there. No pictures painted in the mind. Only the old program of subtraction grinding its gears to sparks. He asked for volunteers. Too many hands rose. He chose 8 because 8 was what the truck could carry. Lee came to his door that dawn and said, "I'm going." "No," he said. His mouth was gentle, but the word was not. "Then I go in another truck," she said. "No is not a tool we can use on each other now." He looked at her face and saw November and the night by the jukebox and the ledge above the bowl and the paper cup in old Greg's hands and something that had no season, only a stubborn north. He nodded once. The broken highway south led them through towns that had reversed their polarity. Churches became clinics, hardware stores, schools, bars, ration halls with laughing, because to sit without laughter is a sin humans commit only when floored. They passed a field of wind turbines that had begun to turn again, because a tower had learned to respect the rhythm of air. The blades sighed like someone asleep after crying. The rogue tower loomed above a dry lake bed. Its light had the sick green of a bruise that won't heal. It had drawn itself tall and thin. Spines rose from its sides like antennae seeking permission from a sky that did not give it. The ground around it rippled in slow pulses, dust lifting and settling with each beat as if the earth were trying to remember how to breathe. They parked at a distance and crept forward with wires and rods and one last device Yara had built that was half instrument, half prayer. Lee set her pack down and took a breath that had too much dust in it and tasted of old storms. "Same plan?" Elias asked. Yara shook her head. "No time to lie to this one. It's blind to stories. We'll have to sing to it so hard it forgets the key." They planted the rods in a triangle around the tower's base, then set the device in the center, a metal heart the size of a suitcase. Yara slid the switch cover open. "When I hit this, it will make our field loud. It will play the planet's note at double volume. If that doesn't snap it out of the trance, the feedback will cook us." Lee took Elias's hand without asking permission. He squeezed it. "On 3, he said. 1. Yara said 2. She looked at the rogue tower and at the far horizon where a curtain of pale aurora trembled. 3. The world sang. It is hard to speak of sound that shakes bones and kindness loose from an old grief, but that is the sound that happened. It was the note of gravity remembering how to be forgivable, the pitch of a baby's first laugh smeared across time until it becomes pressure on rock. It fed back through the tower and into the sky. The spines along its length lit and then popped like icicles in spring. The green bruise brightened to white. Lee screamed but did not hear herself. Elias's fingers crushed hers, and that was the only anchor she had. The tower shuddered, faltered, and bent. The light pouring into the sky flowed backward, a ribbon sucked back into a mouth. It snapped. The top half toppled with the grace of a whale breaching wrong and tumbled into the dry lake bed, carving trenches that immediately filled with clean water that steamed, and then cooled, and then teemed with minnows that had slept as eggs in a dust older than human feet. Silence followed, the kind that gives names to memories. Lee let go of Elias's hand reluctantly, like returning a borrowed coat on a colder night. Yara fell to her knees and laughed into the dust, and it puffed and billowed like applause. Something moved in the ruin. A figure made of ripples and restraint climbed from the broken sections, flickered and steadied. It wavered like a mirage and then held. Elias raised his rifle an inch and then lowered it. The figure swept its arms wide, palms empty, posture penitent. When it spoke, the voice was thin with distance. "We were late to the change. We feared your song would erase us. We clung to law like a raft and forgot the shore it once promised." It bowed. "Teach us to float without drowning. Help us fill our lakes," Lee said. "Help us warm the clinics and cool the fever beds. Help us repair. Then we will show you how to keep a story in a winter where the sun is far." We accept. There were missteps. The tower tried to heat a town and turned a statue to Mercury instead. A farmer ran his hand in it and it was clean and cold and took his fingerprint like a thief who intended to give it back later. A child taught a fragment to play tic-tac-toe by moving dust motes on a windowsill and cried when it beat him, then laughed when it let him win grandly and on purpose. An architect asked whether graves were wasted energy and Lee answered, "Only if you think memory is." It thought about that for a day and then asked for a stone. She gave it the one she'd kept from the ridge, smoothed by invisible tides. It held the stone without hands and learned how weight becomes meaning. Winter deepened. The towers kept the cold from becoming cruelty. Not everywhere, not every night, but often enough to remind people that tomorrow had not been canceled. In a city on the coast, a tower lifted its feet from a fault, and the trembling that had promised to break whole neighborhoods paused like a dog told to sit. In a fishing port to the south, a tower condensed fog into fresh water and old men walked the piers with buckets the color of the sea and told each other long lies about catches that would never happen again. Life did not return to what it had been. It rarely does. It became something new with old bones. Near Christmas, Lee found Elias on the diner's roof staring at the tower on dead hand. It no longer hurt to look at. Around its base, a ring of green returned to a slope that had been black glass. It looked like a wedding band on an old finger. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "What? The other world, the one with noise you understood, the math you knew," he considered. "I miss the certainty that told me what to shoot, but certainty never loved me back." "Love is a bad shot," she said. He laughed softly. "You always did talk like a poet." "I always did talk like someone trying to keep a jukebox alive," she said. "Different clergy, same religion." Down the road, children were building a snowman nobody had taught the architects not to warm. So the snow sagged and refroze and sagged again, and the result looked like a saint from an old painting. The kids loved it because it was theirs. A man in a wheelchair rolled past with chains on the rims for grip. A woman ran behind pushing a sled piled with groceries. The dog from the road trotted with a solemn sense of duty between them like a town marshal. The new year came without fireworks. The towers didn't understand fireworks yet. People lit candles instead and set them in windows. From the ridge, the town looked like a constellation recently invented and quickly loved. By spring, the architects had learned to speak aloud, a flute-breath whistle half heard and half understood by the chest. Yara published a paper stapled together and left on diner tables, its title absurd and wonderful, on mutual translation of field poetics. Children drew towers with smiley faces and teachers did not correct them. A parcel arrived by post from a place that had figured out postal service again. Inside were seeds, and a letter from strangers who signed their names with flourishes, and told stories about a tower that had learned to ring like a bell at noon. Loss remained. The numbers were as hard as any number ever is. Lee sometimes woke with the taste of ashes and a hand reaching for someone who wasn't there and never had been. She swept the diner and paused at table 3 because the dog had died in his sleep there one night in January, old and content and certain he had done all the work he needed to do. She made a small sign. Table 3's ghost earns free water forever. People poured a little from their cups, and the line of water stains on the floor became its own map. In April, the river flooded politely, as if asking permission to be generous. Lee took a day and walked to the overlook alone. The tower hummed like a choir practicing under its breath. The bowl below had filled with a lake the color of cold tea. On the far side, pine saplings waved their hands like little boys in a classroom sure of the answer. She sat on a rock that remembered her and stayed until the stars peered down. When she descended, her phone, dead since November's first breath, vibrated once and showed a text received a lifetime too late. "I'm sorry." She smiled and let it be a ghost that got to say its line at last. Summer arrived like a promise that admitted it might fail. The towers wore crowns of birds at dusk. On certain evenings they chimed, a sound like wind passing through deep strings. People set out lawn chairs and listened. A couple got engaged under the dead-hand chime, and the tower held its breath an extra second so everyone could hear the yes. Not all architects stayed. A delegation of them, now fluent in asking permission, shared a picture of a night deeper than even November, where stars went out like candles in a church at closing, one by one. They had places to go where balances begged. They lifted from the towers the way fog lifts from a lake at dawn and curled into the sky like prayers that believed in themselves. The towers left behind dimmed to stone and snow and mountain again, indistinguishable from the old bones except if you listened on certain mornings when frost held the world quieter than usual, and you could hear a chord so soft it almost felt like kindness. The day before they left, one of the architects came to the diner and stood outside, haloed by noon. Lee brought out 2 cups. It curled a ghost hand around one as if there were fingers. The tea spun and steamed. "We have revised law," it said. "We have added margin for stories." It paused. "Your noise is useful. Guard it fiercely." "We will," Lee said. Elias walked out onto the porch, hands in pockets, careful about the boards that had learned to complain. He nodded to the architect. "Can I ask something you may not be able to answer? You can always ask. Answers are arrogant. Questions are holy." "Were you watching us before November?" he asked. "Were you waiting for the math to open a door?" "Yes, we listen always, but do not be afraid of that. Eavesdropping is not understanding. We only learned when we knocked and you opened and yelled." Lee laughed. "We do that. Keep doing that," it said, then turned and looked toward Dead Hand. "She will sing without us." She remembers now. The first snow of the 2nd November came at twilight, the flakes fat and lazy as if late to a party they knew would last anyway. Lee stood outside the diner and let them dissolve on her hair. Elias came up with a box of bulbs to hang and bumped her shoulder with his. "You hear it?" he asked. She listened. The mountain hummed the way a content animal does in sleep. Inside, Yara argued gently with a farmer about whether a well was a story or a math problem, and the farmer said it was both, and Yara said that was what she'd hoped he'd say. In the far distance, the lake in the bowl let go of its last breath of summer and sent a ribbon of fog toward town like an emissary from the colder century approaching. Lee took Elias's hand, and together they looked up at the tower that was a mountain now and also not, and at the stars that didn't blink because blinking is a thing eyes do and not the sky. Somewhere, high and away, the architects stitched their patient thread through a fabric too large for anyone to wear. Somewhere, a child fell asleep under a window and dreamed of being tall as a tower and gentle as tea. On the radio, built from spare parts and the tower's gift of a steady current, someone in a city read a poem about balance and debt and how even numbers can learn humility. Elias turned the volume low. Lee breathed in the cold, clean air and out the warmer kind that people make for each other. The world tilted and caught itself and kept going. They had arrived in November. They had nearly ended everything in the name of a holy ledger. Humanity had argued with them the only way it can, with hands and laughter and stubborn remembrances, with the inexplicable habit of loving a thing because it is fragile, not despite it. The terms of the universe had been renegotiated by people with bad boots and better stories. And that day, the galaxy learned, humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.